March 19th. Overwhelmed on my porch by sorrow. Above the flood, well into the pond. So much lost. Blake lost all my books. Yet still overwhelmed by beauty, I can't help but take a picture. Many weeks will pass before we return. I don't need to listen to my own music, to my own sorrows, or even to the Matthew Passion to wake up in this season. This morning, as I step out my door, I practically fall onto the lake, listening to the call and the chorus of the birds. Transfixed by their music, as much as by the light of the rising sun that ferries pink clouds into the pond and bestows golden auras along the lacework of stems that frame it, I take a few steps and then stand completely still. Take a few steps again and stand stunned, unable to walk further on my familiar path, feeling spring on my cheeks, delight in each breath, and awe in my ears. This morning, when I first heard them, long before dawn it seemed, I was touching you. Sometimes knees feeling warmth of thighs, sometimes gently holding a shoulder, a belly, a breast with an arm, sometimes through blankets or bedclothes or not, listening to your breath and reflecting how we move like the seasons, with our hearts close and then distant. Today, spring is arising. Come to me, my love. Let us celebrate. Spring is here. Shortly after shadow breaks into blazing light, cries of birds. A spring flock somewhere has landed. I hear cries I haven't heard in 100 days, calling me with their chatter and their longing. I will follow them. Perhaps their cries will unlock the frozen pond. Postscript. I am enormously optimistic about life and the underlying nature of things. My lifelong exploration of the present moment daily confirms this optimism, though the kind of freedom I explore is fragile, along with all forms of human freedom, not only to nature, but also to civilization. Sad to say, but all creatures have become vulnerable to civilization, as it has so suddenly spread across the world. As a species that creates its cultural forms and lives in them, we must adapt quickly to our new reality and transform ourselves from tribal cultures in competition or at war to a culture that is global in its care and concern, creating environments where all creatures thrive. We must shift from an orientation that is self-centered and self-serving to one that is kind. We have no choice. We will be the shepherds of the planet or be its scourge. Too quickly, our individual faults can be magnified 1,000,000-fold by hierarchies of power, and almost overnight our anger, our prejudice, our autocracy and inequality, our pollution, our cynicism and distrust, our greed and our lies can threaten the whole species and many others with it. It is not greed alone and its like that is our problem, but that we have enshrined systems that reward greed over kindness and wisdom. We must alter in short order both the greed within us and the systems that enable it. Just a couple of cultural changes dedicated to human flourishing could reduce these dangers overnight. One addresses the flaws in our own individual natures, our greed and fear that arise as misinterpretations of our relationship to the present moment and to the nature of time and space. The other addresses the great and sudden power of hierarchies to create harmful, negative externalities out of even profound aspirations for good. The map of mindfulness. On the page, you see a design like an hourglass with two ovals, one at the top and one at the bottom. And at the center of the hourglass, you'll see something that we're calling the present moment. The top oval has a grid through it, and it's identified as time and space, or as the self, or as civilization. The two lines going from this top oval down to the center of the hourglass, to the present moment, are identified as well. On the left-hand side, going down, you will see the words listening and mindfulness. On the right-hand side, with an arrow going back up into time and space from the present moment, the words engagement and compassion or passion. On either side of the present moment, there are pairs of descriptors. On the left-hand side, we see the mirror of awakening or the mirror of forgetfulness. And on the right-hand side, describing the present moment, we see awake and conscious or reactive and unconscious. Moving down into the lower portion of the hourglass, we see the term cultivating selflessness. And then at its base, the great oval at the bottom of the map, are the terms great quiet, great virtue, great spirit. The map is from A Golden Civilization and the Map of Mindfulness. The first cultural change would be to understand the world as it is, not as a Cartesian grid of time and space from which we mine material and mental wealth, but as a great flourishing of the present moment, filled with virtue, relationship, and creative engagement. This understanding can be accomplished with the utmost simplicity by replacing our familiar maps of space-time with a map of mindfulness centered on the present moment, the only moment we've ever experienced, and the only place freedom resides. And then to practice the art of the present moment through a daily contemplative practice like mindfulness. I tell my students, if they are just beginners, to practice mindfulness 20 minutes a day at a minimum. And if they are already accomplished meditators, to double the amount they are currently meditating. You can't do too much. It will increase both your energy and your ease, and will spread well-being to all whom you encounter. It will increase freedom throughout the world. The map of mindfulness is a map of the world as it is. It includes time and space, but is centered on and arises out of the present moment, less acquisitive and analytic than it is relational and expansive. Mastery of the present moment is the greatest thing we can accomplish in our lives. When you focus on the present moment with mindfulness, you cultivate selflessness, graciousness, kindness, listening more than engaging, patience, clarity, equanimity, energy, wisdom, relationships, and great hearts. You cultivate emotional intelligence and virtue more than analytic and acquisitive skills, reducing greed and fear everywhere. Fiduciary responsibility. My one-sentence legislative proposal. A fiduciary standard of obligation is required for all institutions, corporate, nonprofit, and governmental, to place the interests of all stakeholders, of truth, of humanity, democracy, and the living planet that sustains us, first, above their own self-interest. I support making fiduciary in all things the law of the land. The second cultural change we must accomplish is to make certain that every institution, every hierarchy of power in civilization, is dedicated to human flourishing and freedom. With a simple piece of legislation and a good deal of hard work, we can end war, corruption, autocracy, distrust, prejudice, gross inequality, famine, racism, propaganda and false news, and earth dangers fostered by humanity. 250 years ago, our great explosion of growth and innovation began, with dramatic increases in human knowledge, leisure, and longevity. Extraordinary. And yet you would think that by now, after 250 years of development, at the top of every hierarchy of power, and filtering all the way down, we would find the very best of humanity, our wisdom and compassion. But instead, most of us would be hard-pressed to name even a single such hierarchy permeated by the best of humanity. It's time we did. By a simple legislative tweak to the organization and creation of every institution, whether corporate, governmental, or nonprofit, requiring them all to place first in their responsibility a fiduciary obligation to all we hold dear, so that their first impulse is always to act humanely, and so our first and everlasting experience of them is one of trust. Supporting humanity in this way must be a requirement for any institution to exist, the ticket to becoming a corporation, a government, or a nonprofit, and to maintaining that status. These reflections on Spectacle Pond in winter were composed as daily reminders to live in the present moment, alive to our senses and to who we are, and to turn us, as if glancing in a mirror, toward what has been hidden, toward Mother Nature, and toward our face before it was born. There we understand how perfectly a poem of a blizzard, even on a sunny day, can find its home as a reflection in the clear waters of Spectacle Pond. George Kinder is a poet, photographer, Buddhist meditation teacher, author, and a global thought leader in the financial world. His life work is the present moment. Deep bows. What is my inspiration? Chinese landscape sage, in cabin, writing, meditating, holding a pen. Zen master pointing at the moon. The Buddha, on his night of enlightenment, touches the earth. Meditation. In each moment, I point at the moment, or at the breath. Walking hand in hand down the path through the glade with you, as though it were a gateless gate. All fingers are from a single hand. In Zen, we ask Hakuin's question, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Gasho.